So let's look at the images now that I've had a chance to process them in Lightroom and Photoshop. This is the waterfall image. This is the 2-second exposure. I didn't bother processing the one that was shorter because once I realized it hadn't gotten close to a second, I didn't want to fool with that one. So this is the 2-second one. This is the one where I use the neutral density filter. So let's look at the image a little more in detail. So the water's nice and blurred. There is a bit of definition where the water's hitting the pool. A longer shutter speed probably would have made this a little bit smoother looking, but overall it looks pretty good. Most of the image was static except for two other places. One, there is some blurring of the leaves here where the wind was blowing, and that's just going to happen. And another is down here where the leaves were spinning around in a pool. You can see a little bit of definition here of the leaves on the edges, probably because the shutter speed wasn't slow enough to blur them a little bit more. So a longer shutter speed might have made a more pleasing effect. But overall, I'm pretty pleased with the image. So next time I might try and remember to take several exposures. If I had a neutral density filter, it would let me get longer. And that was probably the key that day. I only had the one that was going to work, and 2 seconds is what it got me, and that was about all I could do. So now let's look at one of the images from the creek. This is the 2-second exposure using the variable neutral density filter. And let's look at it in detail. So we've got a bit of definition here. You can see the water is picking up the reflection of the sunlight. So you kind of get in these little bit of kind of gossamer looking trails. And then here in the upper left-hand corner, you're getting some definition in the tree trunks. The water has a nice glassy look to it because of the long exposure, but it's not slow enough that you're losing definition in the trees. So now let's look at the other image, which was a 5-second shutter speed. And you can see pretty much immediately that up here we're losing definition in the tree trunks because the water has had longer to move. It's a longer shutter speed. This is the 5-second shutter speed. So you're losing definition. Also, this is the image where the variable neutral density filter was at a pretty high setting, so I'm getting vignetting in the lower left and upper right. So let me turn off everything that I did in Photoshop so you can kind of see the vignetting effect. The first thing I did was try and balance out the vignetting, so I darkened the other two corners, and then I selectively lightened parts of the image. And when I was processing it, I thought I liked this image better, but the more I looked at it, I preferred this one because I liked the counterpoint I got in these tree trunks, which gets lost in this version because the water's moving so much during the long exposure. It's leaving all of that very blurred, but I'm picking it up here. Let me turn off all of these so you can kind of see. This is how it came out in Photoshop or out of Lightroom. And then I added two curves layers to darken things. And then I selectively lightened parts of the image where the water was and where the tree trunks were. So overall, I'm pretty pleased with this version of the image. To finish up, let's look at a few photos I've taken in years past where I've tried to blur water. And I believe all of these I probably didn't have a neutral density filter on the camera. I just had conditions that allowed me to get close to a second or longer than a second just because of the lighting of the day. So this particular image, it's in the Smokies. It's a rock in a stream. It's close to a full second. It's 0.7 of a second, so it's pretty close. It's still not, I think, slow enough because I'm still seeing quite a bit of definition in the water blur, but it's about all I could work with that day given the lighting conditions. And I had the aperture fairly small at f/16. I really didn't want to go any smaller than that. So this is what I was able to get with the camera. This image also again in the Smokies. And it's a 1.1 second shutter speed. One thing to note whenever you've got water moving really fast over a waterfall like this is if you can't get close to a second and you like half of a second or something like that, you still might have enough of a blur to get what you want because the water's moving so quickly. here I was able to, just based on the situation, it was a cloudy day, I could get at 1.1 second at a really slow shutter speed, or yeah, I could get at 1.1 second a slow shutter speed at a fairly small aperture f11 at the lowest ISO that the camera would allow. These next two are in Minnesota. This was after a fairly significant rainfall. So that's why you see sort of a discoloration in the water. There was a lot of sediment in the water, so parts of it looked kind of brown. That's something you could fix in Photoshop, but it's another thing to keep in mind. If you're photographing water after a significant rainfall, your water's probably not going to be white. This is a 3-second shutter speed. It must have been a pretty dim conditions, I think, that day. It was probably overcast. I can't remember if I had a neutral density filter or not, or maybe I was using a polarizer, which will also take some light out of the scene and let you get with slower shutter speeds. This is just another vantage point of the same waterfall. You can see there's quite a bit of sort of a brown yellowish color in the water due to all the sediment coming over. And then lastly, a different location in Minnesota, and again you can still see, because of the rainfall, there's quite a bit of sediment coming through in the water. And this was a really slower shutter speed, 8 seconds. Probably because I really don't know why. I must have had a filter on the camera. It was, I mean, you can see that there was a sunny day. There was light coming over here from the sunlight, although most of this was in shadow. But still, at ISO 100, I'm probably going to need a filter to get something that slow. So even if you don't have a filter, you might be able to get away with pretty slow shutter speeds. But when in doubt, make sure you got a neutral density filter, or at least a polarizer in your camera bag to take some of the light out of the scene so you can get slow.